The old woman stood alone in a field of white. Not snow, flowers, millions of them, small, delicate, trembling in the July wind like something alive and holy. She was 68 years old. She was wearing her dead husband's coat. And she was smiling. Behind her, the sound of 30 beehives, working. A low, endless hum, the sound of a promise being kept 46 years late. 300 miles of Nebraska wheat had died that summer. The drought was the worst anyone could remember. Men she had known her whole life were losing farms their grandfathers built. The bank was calling. The elevator was empty. The county was breaking. And here she was, alone, in 80 acres of white. 6 months ago they had laughed at her, at the co-op counter. In front of everyone, the manager had said her mind was going. That grief had made her foolish, that she should sell the farm and move to town before she embarrassed her dead husband's name. She had not argued. She had simply gone home, opened a trunk in the attic, and found something she had buried when she was 22 years old. A dream, a notebook, and a letter she had never sent. This is the story of what happened when she finally sent it. March in Cheyenne County, Nebraska, is not spring. Not yet. It is the ugly in-between. The snow melts into mud. The wind still cuts. The wheat fields sit brown and flat and waiting. And the sky is that particular gray that makes you forget color exists. Elspeth Halvorsen stood at her kitchen window that morning, coffee in one hand, the other hand pressed flat against the cold glass. She was watching a crow walk across her yard. Just walking, not flying. Walking, which felt that morning like the most honest thing she had seen in weeks. The house behind her was quiet. It had been quiet for 3 years, since Magnus, and 5 years silent in another way, since Aldrich. 2 men in the ground, 1 father, 1 son, both hers. The coffee had gone cold. She hadn't noticed. She turned from the window, sat down at the kitchen table, opened the envelope from the bank. Second notice. She read it once, then again, then folded it, then unfolded it, then read it a third time, because sometimes numbers change if you look at them enough. Except they don't. She was going to have to sell the farm, for 100 acres, Halvorsen ground since 1919, the year she was born. Her father-in-law had broken the sod. Magnus had worked it for 43 years. Aldrich would have worked it for 43 more, except Aldrich was dead. Machine tipped over. Wet spring ground, 1982. He was 37. He left behind a wife who moved back to Ohio, and a daughter named Winifred, who was 3 years old at the time and remembered nothing. Winnie was 8 now. Winnie was the only reason Elspeth had not sold the farm yet. Because Winnie came every other weekend. Because Winnie ran through the wheat like it belonged to her. Because Winnie once asked, at age 6, if the farm would be hers someday. And Elspeth had said, "Maybe, sweetheart, maybe," which was a lie she had been carrying ever since. The bank wanted an answer by April. The taxes were due in June. The tenant farmer she rented her ground to was not making her enough. Not anymore. Wheat prices had cratered. Everyone knew it. Everyone was pretending they didn't. She thought about the money her sister had left her. Gone. She thought about the small savings Magnus had built. Almost gone. She thought about her age. 68. She thought about the men in town. What they would say. Poor Elspeth couldn't hold on to it. Not without Magnus. She stood up. She poured the cold coffee into the sink. She said out loud to no one, "I need to clean the attic," because she had to start somewhere. And starting with old boxes felt easier than starting with a for sale sign. The attic was cold. The attic was always cold. Elspeth climbed the pull-down stairs slowly. 1 step at a time. Her knee had been bad since 1978. Her back had been bad since forever. At the top she pulled the string. A single bare bulb flickered on. Dust. Boxes. A dressmaker's dummy that had belonged to her mother-in-law. Aldrich's high school yearbook. Magnus fishing rods still in their case. A crib. A rocking horse. A whole life, packed in cardboard, waiting to be sorted, or thrown out or forgotten. She sat down on a low trunk near the window, just to catch her breath. The trunk shifted under her. She stood up, looked down at it. She didn't recognize it, which was strange. She thought she knew every corner of this attic. She had cleaned it twice a year for 46 years. But this trunk, this old wooden trunk with the brass corners, she had never seen it before. Or, wait, she had. She just hadn't seen it in a very long time. She knelt down, slow, careful. She wiped the dust off the top with the sleeve of her sweater. A leather handle, brass hinges, her initials carved into the lid. M.L. 1938. Her maiden name, Elspeth Margaret Landsteiner. She had brought this trunk to Nebraska in 1941, when she came to marry Magnus. She had thought Magnus threw it out. He had said he threw it out. He had told her, kindly, gently, in the second week of their marriage, that a woman didn't need to keep her college things anymore. That a wife didn't need textbooks. That a mother wouldn't have time for notebooks. She had cried a little, and she had believed him. And now here it was, in her attic, under a blanket, behind a broken lamp. For 46 years. He had lied. He had kept it. He had lied to her and he had kept it, and he had never once said a word. She opened the trunk. Her hands were shaking. Inside, a stack of textbooks. Introductory agronomy, soil chemistry, plant physiology of the Great Plains. A pair of gloves she had forgotten she owned. A photograph of her at 20, standing in front of Agricultural Hall at the University of Nebraska, smiling, wearing a coat she had saved 6 months to buy, a dried flower, pressed, brittle, buckwheat, and a notebook. Green cover, worn, her handwriting on the front, careful and young. E.M. Landsteiner. Independent Study Notes. Fall 1940. Spring 1941. She sat down on the floor. She could not stand. She opened the notebook. Buckwheat. Page after page. In her own handwriting. Cramped and eager, and hopeful in a way she had forgotten she was ever capable of being. Yield comparisons. Soil requirements. Bloom cycles. Bee compatibility. Grain markets in the Northeast. A hand-drawn map of Nebraska, with soil types shaded in colored pencil. She had loved this. She had loved this so much she had forgotten she had loved it. She turned to the back of the notebook. And there it was, a folded piece of paper, yellow with H, a letter, addressed, never sent. Dr. Marianne Kestrel, Department of Agronomy, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Nebraska. She unfolded it. Her 22-year-old self, writing to a professor she had admired from afar, proposing to continue her research, asking about graduate opportunities, explaining her idea about buckwheat as a rotation crop for marginal land in southeastern Nebraska. The letter was dated April 3, 1941. She was getting married on April 19th. She had written the letter. She had addressed it. She had put a stamp on it. She had put it in the trunk. She had never mailed it, because her mother had said, the night before the wedding, Elspeth, women don't write letters to professors. Women cook for their husbands. And Elspeth had believed her, too. She sat in the attic for a long time. The light from the little window moved across the floor. She read the letter once, twice, 3 times. She thought about the young woman who had written it. She thought about all the years since. She thought about Magnus. She thought about the trunk. She began to cry. Not loudly, not the way women cry in movies. She cried the way women cry when they are alone in an attic. Quiet, small, steady, like a leak. She stayed up there until the light started to fade. Then she carried the trunk down the stairs. 1 step at a time. It was heavy. She did not stop to rest. Winnie came that weekend. Elspeth had made pancakes. Winnie was watching a cartoon in the living room. The television was old and the picture flickered. Elspeth stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a coffee cup she had not drunk from, watching her granddaughter. Winnie was small for 8. Long hair, tangled from sleep, bare feet. She was laughing at something a cartoon rabbit had said. Elspeth thought. She had spent 46 years making pancakes for people. She had made pancakes for Magnus for 43 of those years. She had made pancakes for Aldrich until he was 37, and then he was gone. She had made pancakes for Winnie every other weekend, since Winnie was old enough to eat them, and she had liked making pancakes. But she had never once, in 46 years, done a single thing that was hers. Not one thing. She had been a good wife, a good mother, a good grandmother, a good neighbor, a good member of the church, a good citizen of Cheyenne County. She had been good. She had also been small. She had been very small, for a very long time. She sat down next to Winnie on the couch. "Grandma," Winnie said, without looking away from the television. "Are you sad?" Elspeth thought about it. "Not sad exactly." "Then what?" Elspeth considered the question. "Late," she said. "I think I'm late." "Late for what?" "I don't know yet." Winnie turned and looked at her. Big brown eyes. "Grandma." "Yes." "Show me." "Show you what?" "Whatever you're late for." Elspeth brought Winnie up to the kitchen. The trunk was on the table. Winnie's eyes got big. "What's that?" "Something I forgot I had." "Can I open it?" "You may." Winnie opened it slowly, careful the way children are careful when they know something is important, even if they don't know why. She lifted out the notebook. "This is your handwriting." "Yes. But it's small." "I was small then." "You were a kid?" "I was 22. Winnie flipped through the pages, squinting at the diagrams, the colored map. She looked up. "What is this, Grandma?" Elspeth took a breath. "It's a plant, a crop, called buckwheat." "Like pancakes?" Elspeth smiled. "You could make pancakes from it, yes. But it's more than that. It grows on bad ground, where nothing else will grow, and the bees love it." Winnie thought, "So why don't you grow it?" Elspeth opened her mouth, closed it. The question sat in the room. Small, simple, impossible to answer honestly. "Because my mother told me not to. Because my husband told me not to. Because I was afraid." "I don't know, sweetheart," she said finally. Winnie shrugged, the way 8-year-olds shrug. "Then do it now." That night, after Winnie's mother came to pick her up, Elspeth sat at the kitchen table alone. The notebook was open. The letter was next to it. She thought about her age. She thought about her knees. She thought about the bank. She thought about the men at the co-op. She thought about Magnus. She thought about the trunk in the attic. For 46 years, he had lied, kindly, softly, every day. For 4.5 decades, and she had let him, which was the harder truth. She had let him. She picked up the telephone. She dialed information. "Lincoln, Nebraska," she said. "The university, agronomy department." The operator connected her. A young voice answered. "University of Nebraska, agronomy." Elspeth's voice caught in her throat. She had not made a phone call to a stranger in 3 years. She swallowed. "I'm looking for a professor," she said. "Dr. Marianne Kestrel. Is she still there?" A pause. "Dr. Kestrel is emerita, but she comes in Tuesdays." "Emerita?" "She's retired, but she still keeps an office." "Oh, do you want her voicemail?" No, just tell me. Is she alive?" The young voice laughed, kindly. "Very much so, ma'am." "How old is she now?" "I don't know. 70-something. She would be 78. "Yes, ma'am, that sounds right." The young voice waited. Elspeth said, "Please leave her a message. Tell her Elspeth Landsteiner called. From the class of 1941. Tell her I finally sent the letter." "Ma'am, just tell her that. She'll understand." She hung up the phone. She sat in the dark for a long time. 3 days later, the phone rang. Elspeth was washing dishes. She almost didn't answer. Hello, a woman's voice. Old, steady, warm. Is this Elspeth Landsteiner? Halvorsen. It's Halvorsen now. But yes. A pause. I remember you. Elspeth closed her eyes. Do you? Fall of 1940. You sat in the back of the lecture hall. You wore a green coat. You asked a question about phosphorus mobilization that I could not answer on the spot. I had to look it up. I remember you. Elspeth was crying now. Silently. I wrote you a letter. I know you did. I never sent it. You did, actually. The dish in Elspeth's hand slipped. Fell into the sink. Did not break. What? You sent me a letter, Elspeth. In the spring of 1941. A summary of your independent study. Beautifully written. You asked about graduate opportunities. No, that letter is in front of me. On my kitchen table. I found it 3 days ago. In a trunk in my attic. I never mailed it. There was a long silence on the other end. Dr. Kestrel spoke slowly. Elspeth. I received a letter from you in April of 1941. I wrote back. Twice. When you didn't respond, I thought you had changed your mind. I always wondered. Elspeth sat down. Hard. On the kitchen chair. That's not possible. It's possible. But the letter is here. Then someone else sent one. Elspeth put her hand to her mouth. Oh. Elspeth. Oh no. Elspeth, are you all right? No. Do you want to talk about it another time? No. Please stay on the line. They talked for an hour. Elspeth told her about the notebook, about the trunk, about Winnie's question, about the bank, about the farm. Dr. Kestrel listened. At the end, Dr. Kestrel said, Elspeth, there is still a market. There is still a need. There is still a place for what you were thinking about in 1941. Buckwheat. And better than in 1941, actually. There's a specialty food market now. There's an organic honey market. There's a real economic case for marginal ground. I have marginal ground. How much? 80 acres. On the north end. Sandy. Rolling. Never made a decent bushel of wheat in my life. Elspeth. Yes. That is exactly the ground I would plant. Elspeth closed her eyes. I'm 68 years old. I'm 78. I've never planted a thing in my life. Not a real crop. I kept a kitchen garden. That was all. You wrote a 50-page independent study on the agronomy of buckwheat in Nebraska soils in 1941. You know more than most of the men at your co-op know right now. They will laugh at me. Probably. They will. Elspeth, let them. She sat with that for a long time after she hung up. Let them. 2 words. They rearranged her whole life. She had spent 46 years not letting them. Not letting anyone. Not letting her mother be disappointed. Not letting her husband feel small. Not letting the neighbors talk. Not letting anyone see her want anything they didn't already give her permission to want. She had let them run her whole life. By trying to make sure they never had anything to laugh at. And in doing so, she had given them everything. Her 20s, her 30s, her 40s, her 50s, her 60s. She said it out loud. Let them. The kitchen did not respond. She got up. She walked to the desk in the hall. She got a pen. She sat down at the kitchen table. She opened her old notebook to a blank page in the back. She wrote a single line at the top. Buckwheat, 80 acres, North Field, Spring 1987. Then she underlined it. Twice. Then she went to bed. And slept, for the first time in 3 years, without waking up at 3 in the morning. The next Saturday morning, Elspeth drove to the co-op in Brock, Nebraska. Population 210. 1 stoplight, blinking, a post office, a grain elevator, a feed store, a co-op with a long wooden counter that had been polished by 40 years of men's elbows. She parked her truck. Magnus truck, really. An old blue Ford she had never learned to love. but had learned to drive. She got out. She walked in. The bell above the door jingled. 4 men at the counter turned and looked at her. Torben Vale, the co-op manager, was leaning on the counter. 55 years old, barrel-chested, kind eyes. A man who had known her for 30 years. Who had brought a casserole to the house when Magnus died. "Elspeth," he said, warm. "What can I do for you?" She walked to the counter. She set her notebook down. She said, in the steadiest voice she had, "I need to order buckwheat seed. Enough for 80 acres. The silence that followed was not immediate. It arrived in stages. First, Torben blinked. Then, one of the men at the counter, an older farmer named Hollis Prue, coughed. Then, another man, Del Ostergaard, said, "Buckwheat?" in a voice like he had never heard the word before in his life. Then Torben said gently, "Elspeth, I'm sorry. What did you say?" "Buckwheat seed. 80 acres. The north field on my place. I want to plant it as soon as the ground warms up." Torben looked at the other men. The other men looked at Torben. Hollis Prue said, "For a cover crop?" "No," Elspeth said. "As a cash crop." Del Ostergaard laughed. Once, a single sharp sound. Torben Vale did not laugh. Not yet. He was too kind for that. He was, instead, going to try to save her. "Elspeth," he said, slowly. "Elspeth, nobody around here plants buckwheat. It's not. We don't stock the seed. There's no market. There's no. Are you sure you want to? Is Winifred's mother helping you make decisions about the farm?" Elspeth looked at him. Something inside her went very still. "Winifred's mother lives in Ohio," she said. "She does not help me make decisions about my farm. Elspeth, there is a market for buckwheat, specialty grain, health food, honey production. There is a beekeeper in Beatrice who has been looking for buckwheat acreage in this county for a decade. His name is Wendell Brogan." Torben looked at her like she had started speaking Latin. "Elspeth, please order the seed. Elspeth, I hate to see you spend money on something we don't, on something nobody here has ever." Del Ostergaard at the counter said it. Said the thing. He said, and not quite under his breath, "Poor thing. Missing Magnus so bad she's gone soft." The other men chuckled. Softly, nervously, but they chuckled. Torben Vale did not chuckle. But he did not tell Del to shut up either. Which was worse. Elspeth felt her face go hot. Her hands on the notebook did not shake. She had promised herself they would not shake. She looked at Torben. "Are you going to order the seed?" He shifted his weight. He looked down at the counter. "We don't. I can't just order specialty seed for one customer, Elspeth." "Fine. I'd hate to see you. I know what you'd hate to see." She picked up her notebook. She turned. She walked toward the door. Behind her, Del Ostergaard said, still not quite under his breath, "Somebody call Reverend Amlin. That poor woman needs looking after." The men laughed again. Torben Vale said, mildly, "Delaware." But Del had already said it, and Elspeth had already heard. She got in the truck. She did not start it. She sat for a moment. Both hands on the wheel. She thought, "I could go home. I could put the trunk back in the attic. I could sell the farm. I could stop. I could stop right now." She sat there for a long time. The wind rocked the truck a little. She thought about her mother. Women don't write letters to professors. She thought about Magnus. A wife doesn't need textbooks. She thought about Del Ostergaard. That poor woman needs looking after. She thought about Winnie. Then do it now. She started the truck. She did not go home. She drove to the Farmers State Bank in Auburn, 22 miles away, where she had a small account that Magnus had never known about. $640. Her egg money from the years she had kept chickens. She withdrew $400 of it. She drove to the post office in Auburn. She sent a telegram to a specialty seed supplier in Minnesota, whose name Dr. Kestrel had given her the week before. "Need buckwheat seed. Mancan variety. 80 acres. Ship to E. Halvorsen RR2, Brock, Nebraska. Will pay cod. She drove home. She sat at the kitchen table until dark. She did not turn on a light. She did not cry. She thought, let them. 2 weeks later, the seed arrived. 50-pound bags, stacked on a pallet, delivered by a man in a white truck with Minnesota plates, who had driven all night to reach her. She paid him in cash, counted it out on the kitchen table. He looked at the bags, then at her, then at the empty farmhouse, then at the barn. Ma'am, he said, you planting all this yourself? I'm hiring a young man from up the road. Does he know how to plant buckwheat? He'll know when I'm done teaching him. The Minnesota man smiled. Slowly. Good luck, ma'am. Thank you. He drove away. Elspeth stood in the yard. 50-pound bags of buckwheat seed. Enough to plant 80 acres of the sandiest, rockiest, most useless ground in Cheyenne County, Nebraska. The wind moved through the pasture. The wind moved through her hair. She was 68 years old. She had just done the first thing in her adult life that no one had given her permission to do. She stood in the yard for a long time. And then, quietly, she began to laugh. Not big, not loud. A small laugh, private laugh. A laugh that had been waiting 46 years to come out. That night, Winnie called. Elspeth almost never got a phone call from Winnie in the middle of the week. But the phone rang at 7 in the evening. Grandma. Winnie. Sweetheart. Is everything all right? Grandma. I told my teacher. Told her what? About the buckwheat. Elspeth sat down at the kitchen table. Oh. I told her my grandma is planting a crop nobody in her whole town has ever planted. And she asked me why. And I said because she was late. And she asked what that meant. And I said Grandma had a dream, and she forgot about it for a long time, and now she's doing it. And Ms. Waldrop said. What did Ms. Waldrop say, sweetheart? Winnie's voice got very small. She said, that's the bravest thing I've heard all year. Elspeth pressed the phone against her ear. She could not speak. Grandma, are you there? I'm here. Grandma, are you crying? A little bit, sweetheart. Why? Elspeth thought. She thought about a young woman in a green coat, walking across a college campus in 1940. She thought about 46 years of pancakes. She thought about her granddaughter, 8 years old, in a school 200 miles away, telling her teacher, in the plainest words she had, that her grandma was brave. Because you called me brave, sweetheart, she said. And nobody has ever called me that before. Winnie was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, well, you are. Outside, the March wind was still cold. Inside, in the kitchen of a farmhouse that had been silent for 3 years, a woman named Elspeth Halvorsen sat, with a telephone against her ear, and a green notebook open on the table in front of her. The seed was in the barn. The ground was thawing. She was not done. She was only just beginning. The seed sat in the barn for 11 days. Elspeth counted them, because the ground was still too cold, because buckwheat is a warm season crop, because you cannot plant it until the soil holds 55 degrees, and Nebraska in April does not care what you want. So she waited, and she read. She read her own notebook, cover to cover, twice, then a third time, and each time she read it, something strange happened. The young woman who had written it began to speak to her again. The one in the green coat. That young woman had opinions. That young woman had known things. That young woman had, apparently, been right about most of them. Elspeth had forgotten she was ever that person. She had, in fact, forgotten she had ever been a person at all. Separate from Magnus. Separate from Aldrich. Separate from the kitchen and the church basement and the pew and the pancake griddle. She kept reading, and she kept remembering. On the 12th day, the phone rang. She almost dropped the receiver. Hello. A man's voice. Older. Rough. Kind. Mrs. Halvorsen. Yes. This is Wendell Brogan. I keep bees. Out of Beatrice. She sat down. Dr. Kestrel gave me your name, she said. She gave me yours. Oh. She said you have 80 acres of the north field. Sandy. Rolling. Never made a decent wheat crop. That's accurate. She said you're planting buckwheat. I am. There was a pause. Not a hesitant pause. A settled one. Mrs. Halvorsen. I've been looking for 80 acres of buckwheat in this county for 10 years. May I come see the ground? She could not speak for a moment, because a stranger, a man, was asking to see her ground, because he believed her before he had even met her. Yes, she managed. Please. When? Saturday. Saturday is good. See you Saturday, Mrs. Halvorsen. Elspeth. Elspeth. See you Saturday. She hung up the phone. She sat at the kitchen table. She thought about the last time a man had called her by her first name, and meant it as respect and not as pity. She could not remember. Wendell Brogan arrived at 10 o'clock Saturday morning. He was 65, compact, weathered. He wore a canvas jacket that had seen 30 winters and did not seem to care. He came alone. They walked the north field together. Elspeth walked slower than she would have liked. Her knee, but Wendell did not mind. He was walking slow too. His knees, they walked slow together, and it did not feel like weakness. Felt like company. He stopped at the crest of the north field. He looked at the sandy, rolling ground. The scrub, the bad soil, the corner where Magnus had cursed for 40 years every time he ran the drill through it. Wendell said, "This is good ground." Elspeth looked at him. "For buckwheat," he added. "This is very good ground for buckwheat." She almost cried. She did not. She said, "Magnus called it garbage ground." Wendell nodded slowly. Magnus was thinking about wheat. Wheat is not the only measure. Something inside her. Something small and hard that had been packed tight for 4.5 decades. Cracked. Just a little. They stood at the field for an hour. Wendell explained his operation. 30 hives. Buckwheat honey. A specialty market in Omaha. He'd been working the northeast corner of Kansas and the southern edge of Nebraska for years. He was blunt about the money. $18 an acre for hive placement. 20% share on the honey after production cost. 3-year contract. Elspeth blinked. "I'd prefer paper." "Paper it is." He wrote it on a page of her notebook at the kitchen table in a slow and careful hand. Elspeth read the contract twice. She signed it. Wendell signed it. He tore the page out along the perforation. He kept the top half. She kept the bottom. He said, "The bees will come the first week of July. The bloom starts late June." You've read up. I wrote this in 1941. She pushed the old notebook across the table. Wendell picked it up. He turned it in his hands like it was a piece of hand-blown glass. He read the first page. Slowly. He looked up. He said, "Mrs. Halvorsen." "Elspeth." "Yes. You were early." She held his eyes. "I was." He set the notebook down carefully. He said quietly, "Well, you're right on time now." She hired the neighbor's son. His name was Torvald Bink. He was 19. He had one earring, which his mother had cried about, and a truck with no muffler, which his father had cried about. He was not particularly bright, but he was strong. He listened. He did what he was told. She paid him $3 an hour. She taught him how to calibrate a grain drill for buckwheat seed, which is smaller than wheat seed, and drops differently through the metering plates. She stood behind him in the barn for 2 hours the first afternoon, walking him through it. He said once, "Mrs. Halvorsen, my dad says buckwheat is for hippies." She said, "Your dad is wrong." He said, "Okay." That was the end of the conversation. She liked Torvald. He said okay to everything and then did it. They planted the 80 acres on a Thursday in mid-May. Torvald ran the drill. Elspeth stood at the edge of the field and watched. The tractor moved slow across the sandy ground. Back and forth. Back and forth. All morning. All afternoon. She stood there most of the day. Because she wanted to see it. Because she had waited 46 years. because she was not going to miss a single row. Around 3 in the afternoon, an old blue pickup slowed on the county road. Stopped. Just stopped. In the middle of the road. It was Hollis Prue. He rolled his window down. He looked at Torvald, at the tractor, at the drill, at Elspeth, standing there in her husband's canvas coat. He did not wave. He shook his head once. He drove on. By supper time, everyone in Brock, Nebraska, knew that Elspeth Halvorsen was actually going through with it. By the following morning, 3 separate women had called the church to ask Reverend Amlin whether he could come out to the Halvorsen place and, quote, check on her. Reverend Amlin, who was 71 and had known Elspeth for 30 years, said no. He said, Elspeth Halvorsen knows exactly what she's doing. He did not know if that was true, but he said it, which was, in its own way, a small act of grace. May turned into June. The buckwheat came up. Fast. Fast the way buckwheat comes up. Green shoots through the sandy ground within a week. Then a low green mat across the whole north field within 2. Elspeth walked the field every morning at dawn. Every morning, rain or clear. Her knee complained. Her back complained. Her hip complained. She walked anyway, because it was hers, because she had never had a thing that was hers. She would walk to the crest of the field, and stand there, and watch the light come up over her own crop. And sometimes she would think about Magnus, and sometimes she would think about her mother, and sometimes she would think about nothing at all. The thinking about nothing mornings were the best. She had not known there was such a thing as thinking about nothing. She had spent 68 years thinking about other people. The nothing was a gift. Winnie came for the last weekend of the month. She was quiet when she got out of the car. Elspeth noticed immediately. Winnie was never quiet. Winnie was a talker. Elspeth knelt down. Her knee. She winced, but she knelt. Sweetheart, what is it? Winnie's lip trembled. Nothing. Winifred Halvorsen. Nothing, Grandma. You're not looking at me. Winnie looked at the ground. Elspeth waited. Winnie said, in a very small voice. Marcy Loop said. What did Marcy Loop say? Marcy Loop said her dad said. What did Marcy Loop's dad say? Winnie took a breath. He said my grandma is crazy, and that we're going to lose the farm. And that everybody in Brock is going to laugh at me when I have to move in with my grandma, because we don't have any money and... She stopped. She was crying. Elspeth held her. Right there. On the gravel driveway. Elspeth's knee screaming. Elspeth's back screaming. Elspeth's whole body reminding her that she was 68. Elspeth held her granddaughter and did not care. She took Winnie inside. She made her a cup of cocoa. She sat with her at the kitchen table until Winnie stopped crying. Then she said, "Come with me." "Where?" "To the field." They walked, slowly, Winnie's hand in hers. The June sun was warm. The wind was moving, through the grass in the pasture, silver green. They crossed the yard, then the barnyard, then the fence line, then the edge of the pasture. Then the low place where the ground rose up toward the north field. And they came up over the crest. And Winnie stopped, because the buckwheat was not just up now. It was beginning to bloom, the first flowers, not full yet, not the full white. But the first flowers had opened that week. Small, white, trembling. Winnie said, "Grandma, I know. Grandma, I know, sweetheart. It's like the field is covered in stars." Yes. They stood there together. Elspeth did not speak for a long time. Then she knelt, slowly, her knee. She knelt right down there in the sandy dirt at the edge of her own field of stars. She turned Winnie to face her. Winnie's eyes were still wet. Elspeth held her granddaughter's small shoulders in her large old hands. She said, "Winnie, I want you to hear me. Are you listening?" Winnie nodded. "I was your age once." Winnie waited. "I was your age, and I had a dream, and I told my mama about it." And she said, "Elspeth, little girls with dreams end up as women without husbands. And I was afraid, so I put my dream in a drawer, and I got a little older, and I told a boy about it. And that boy said, "That is a very interesting idea, Elspeth. Now let's talk about our wedding." And I was afraid. So I put my dream in a trunk. And I got even older. And I never told anyone about it again. Not for 46 years, Winnie. Not one person. Winnie was listening. Perfectly still, Elspeth said. And then last month I went up in the attic. And I found the trunk. And I opened it. And do you know what I found? Winnie shook her head. I found her. I found the girl I used to be. And she was still in there. She had been waiting for me. All that time. Just waiting. For me to come back and let her out. Winnie's mouth opened, just a little. Winnie, listen to me. I don't ever want you to be afraid the way I was afraid. If someone laughs at you, if Marcy Loop's daddy laughs at you, if a whole town laughs at you, I want you to promise me something, right now, in front of this field. Okay. Promise me you will never put your dream in a trunk. Promise me that if you have a thing inside you, a thing that makes you feel like you're alive, you will tell someone. Tell me. Tell your teacher. Tell the sky. Tell the crows. But do not tell nobody. Do you understand me? Winnie's tears were coming again. Different tears. I promise, Grandma. You promise? I promise. Elspeth pulled her close. Right there at the edge of a white field in June in Nebraska in 1987, with the wind moving through the flowers, an old woman and a little girl held on to each other for a very long time. And when they finally walked back to the house, Winnie was not the same girl who had gotten out of the car that morning. Neither was Elspeth. The bees came on the 5th of July. Wendell Brogan drove down the farm lane in a flatbed truck, with 30 white hive boxes stacked in rows. He drove slow. The bees do not like being jostled. He spent 2 hours placing the hives, along the field margins, in the corners where the buckwheat was thickest, on the low ground where the bloom would concentrate. He worked alone, methodical, bent, set, stepped back. When he was done, he stood at the edge of the field with Elspeth. He said, "This is going to be something." She said, "I hope so." He said, "It is." By the end of the second week of July, the field was in full bloom. There is no way to describe it to a person who has not seen it. 80 acres of buckwheat in full flower. It is not like snow. Snow is dead. This was not dead. It is not like a wheat field. Wheat is one color, and it is a color that means work. This was a color that meant something else. The field looked like the sky had come down to lie on the ground for a while. And the sound. 30 hives at full working strength. Thousands of bees. Every one of them lifting off the boxes at first light, and moving out across the flowers and coming back and going out again. All day, without stopping. The hum was not loud. The hum was constant. It was the sound of a field breathing. Elspeth would walk out at dawn and stand at the edge of it and just listen. And she would think about the girl in the green coat. And she would think, I built this. I did this. Nobody helped me. Nobody gave me permission. Nobody told me it was going to be all right. I did this. She had not felt that. Not once. In 68 years. She had raised a son and buried him. She had loved a husband and buried him. She had baked 10,000 pies, and canned 10,000 jars of tomatoes, and sewn 10,000 hems. And she had done it well. She had done it beautifully. But none of it had been hers. The field was hers. The bees were hers. The white and the hum and the trembling wind. Hers. People started driving by. The county road ran past the north edge of the field. It was not a busy road, but it was busy enough. And people who had never in their lives paid attention to Elspeth Halvorson's place were now slowing down. Then stopping. Then getting out. Then walking to the fence. One morning she counted 6 pickup trucks parked along the shoulder. 6. She stood at her kitchen window and watched the men lean on their tailgates and stare at her field. They did not knock on her door. They did not wave. They just stood there and looked and left. She did not go out to talk to them. She was too proud. Also, she thought they should come to her. She had come to them. She had come to them at the co-op in April. She had put her notebook on the counter. She had asked, politely, directly, and they had laughed. Well, let them come to her now. Torben Vale drove past. Twice. The first time he did not stop. The second time he stopped. He got out. He walked to the fence line. He stood there for a long time. Elspeth watched him from the kitchen window. She did not go out. She wanted to. She did not. Torben stood at the fence for perhaps 10 minutes. Then he got back in his truck. Then he drove away. That night, at the co-op, he did not tell anyone he had stopped. But he told his wife. He said, "Marjorie, I have to tell you something." She said, "What?" He said, "I think I was wrong." She said, "About what?" He said, "About Elspeth Halvorsen." In April, when she came in, his wife put down the dish she was drying. She said quietly, "Torben, you laughed at her." "I didn't laugh." "You let Del Ostergaard laugh at her, and you didn't stop him, which is the same thing." Torben Vale sat down at his kitchen table. He did not answer. He had known his wife for 39 years, and every once in a while she said something that was so exactly true it took the air out of him. That was one of those nights. The drought arrived in the middle of July. At first, nobody called it a drought. At first, they called it a dry spell. But the dry spell did not break. 10 days without rain. Then 15. Then 20. The wheat, which had been shoulder high across the county, began to yellow. Not the good yellow of ripening. The bad yellow. The yellow that means the plant has run out of water 3 weeks before harvest. By the end of July, the county extension office was using the word drought. By the first week of August, the crop reporters were saying it was the worst since 1956. Farmers began to talk in the low, careful way farmers talk when they are looking at losing their operating loan. Not panic. Not yet. But something quieter and heavier. Elspeth heard about it in town. The men at the co-op counter were not laughing anymore. The men at the co-op counter were not saying much of anything. They just stood there, coffee cups in their hands, not talking. Del Ostergaard was there one morning. When Elspeth came in for a spool of thread, Del did not say anything. Del did not look at her. Del looked at the counter. Elspeth bought her thread. She paid. She walked to the door. She turned back. She said, "Delaware." He looked up. Reluctantly, she said, "How's your wheat?" He did not answer for a moment. Then he said, "It's bad, Elspeth." She nodded. She did not gloat. She did not smile. She just nodded and walked out. But her step on the wooden floor of the co-op was different from the step she had walked in with. Her step on the wooden floor of the co-op was the step of a woman who was no longer being looked after. The buckwheat did not care about the drought. Buckwheat has a shallow root system, but it uses water efficiently. It matures fast, 70 to 80 days from planting to harvest. And Elspeth had planted in mid-May, which meant the buckwheat had done most of its growing during the wet part of the season. And the drought that was killing the wheat was arriving right at the time the buckwheat was setting grain. The grain was setting well. The bloom had been long, 6 weeks. The bees had worked it hard. The honey supers in Wendel's hives were heavy. Elspeth walked the field every morning. The bloom was fading now. The white was going to green as the seeds set. But the field was still full of bees, still humming. She stood there one morning in the 3rd week of July. Sun already hot. Sky already white with heat. Cicadas already starting up in the pasture. She was 68 years old. She was wearing her dead husband's canvas coat, even though it was too warm for it, because it made her feel like something bigger was around her shoulders. She stood in her field, and she laughed, out loud, alone. She threw her head back, and she laughed until her ribs hurt, and her eyes watered, and her knee gave out, and she had to sit down in the dirt at the edge of her own crop. She laughed because she had been right. She had been right for 46 years. She had been right when her mother told her to stop. She had been right when Magnus told her to stop. She had been right when the co-op told her to stop. She had been right when Del Ostergaard laughed. She had been right the whole time. And now the wheat was dying. And her buckwheat was standing. And nobody in Cheyenne County could pretend anymore that she was crazy. She laughed until she cried. Then she sat in the dirt for another hour just watching the bees. That afternoon the phone rang. She almost did not answer it. But something made her go inside. She picked up on the 8th ring. Hello. A woman's voice. Middle-aged. Uncertain. Is this Mrs. Halvorsen? Yes. This is Wanda Ostergaard, Del's wife. Elspeth sat down at the kitchen table. She said nothing. Wanda said, Mrs. Halvorsen. Elspeth, I don't know how to say this. Elspeth waited. Del is in a bad way. Our wheat is. The bank called yesterday. Wanda's voice broke. Elspeth closed her eyes. Wanda said, I wanted to say. I know Del was ugly to you in the spring. In the co-op. He came home and told me. He was proud of himself that day. He thought he was being funny. Elspeth waited. Wanda said, He is not proud of himself now. Silence on the line. Elspeth held the phone against her ear and thought. She thought about her own kitchen, about her own bank notice, about her own $640 of egg money. She said, Wanda, yes, bring Del out here on Saturday. Elspeth, he can't. He can, and he will. Bring him out. 2 o'clock. He won't come. Wanda, you tell him I have something to show him, and you tell him it might save his operation. Wanda was crying now. Elspeth, why would you? Because, Elspeth said, and she surprised herself. Because if I don't, I'm no better than any of them. She hung up the phone. She sat at the kitchen table. She looked out the window at the pasture. She thought, let them come. Let all of them come. I have room. That was the shift. That was the thing that changed the story. Not the drought. Not the bloom. Not the bees. The phone call. Because up until that phone call, Elspeth had been alone in this. Alone in the field. Alone in the barn. Alone in the kitchen. Alone against a county that had laughed at her. But when Wanda Ostergaard cried on the phone, something happened. Elspeth stopped being alone. She became, without meaning to, without planning it, without asking for it, a woman other women could call. She had never been that before. She had been a woman other women could depend on for pies, and casseroles, and covered dishes, and prayer chain updates. She had never been a woman other women could call, because they were about to lose their farm. She was now. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time thinking about that. And then she opened her notebook. The new page, the one she had started in April, and she began to write. She wrote until it was dark. She wrote what she would say to Del Ostergaard on Saturday. She wrote what she would say to any man or woman who showed up at her door in the coming weeks. She wrote it plain. She wrote it careful. She wrote it the way Dr. Kestrel had taught her to write it back in 1940. She had thought back then that she was going to change the world. And then she had gotten married. And then she had stopped. She had stopped for 46 years. But she had not stopped forever. That was the thing. She had thought she had stopped forever. She had not. She had just stopped for a while. And now she was starting again. At 68. In a farmhouse in Cheyenne County, Nebraska. With a green notebook and a granddaughter named Winnie, and a beekeeper named Wendell, and a phone that had just rung. And a professor, somewhere in Lincoln, 78 years old, who had remembered her. Elspeth Halvorsen sat at her kitchen table. She was crying. She was also smiling. She wrote until the ink ran out in her pen. And then she got up, and she found another pen. And she kept writing, because the harvest was coming, because the men were coming, because Del Ostergaard was coming on Saturday, because a whole county was about to knock on her door. And this time, she would be ready. Del Ostergaard came on Saturday. 2 o'clock. Exactly. He drove up the lane in an old Chevy that had seen better decades. Wanda in the passenger seat. Both of them looking straight ahead, like people going to a funeral. Elspeth watched from the kitchen window. She had made coffee. She had made cookies. She had cleaned the parlor. She had also changed her blouse 3 times, because she was nervous, which was ridiculous, which she told herself was ridiculous, which did not stop her from changing the blouse a 4th time before she went to the door. Dell would not look at her. Wanda came in first. Small woman, small hands, small voice. Elspeth, thank you. Come in the parlor. There's coffee. Dell stood on the porch. He did not move. Elspeth waited. He said at last, Elspeth, I don't know how to. Dell. I said things. I know. I said things in April. In the co-op. I know, Delaware. I don't know why I said them. I do. He looked up. For the first time. His eyes were red. He said, why? She said, because I was a woman doing a thing you didn't understand. And it scared you. And you made a joke. Because a joke is easier than a question. He stared at her. He did not speak. Then he took off his hat. He held it in front of him with both hands. Like a boy at the door of a woman he had wronged. He said, Elspeth. She waited. He said, I need help. She said, I know you do. Come in the parlor. She showed him the notebook. Not the old one from 1941. The new one. The one she had been writing in every night for 4 months. She showed him the yields she was projecting. She showed him the honey contract. She showed him the specialty grain buyer in Minnesota. She showed him Wendell Brogan's phone number, which she had written on a card in her steady hand. She said, Delaware cannot save your wheat. Nobody can. But I can tell you that if you have 40 acres of your worst ground, and you plant it next spring, you could clear more off those 40 acres than you cleared off 200 acres of wheat this year. Dell looked at the notebook, then at her, then at the notebook again. He said, Elspeth. She waited. He said, you knew this. In April. I knew it. You knew this. When I laughed at you. I knew it. You knew this. When I said the thing about Reverend Amlin. You knew it. I knew it. He set the coffee cup down on her end table. His hand was shaking. He said, Ma'am. He had not called her ma'am since he was 15 years old and delivering newspapers. Ma'am, he said, I am so sorry. She looked at him. She thought about her mother. She thought about Magnus. She thought about 46 years. She said, quietly, Delaware, I forgive you, but I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it. Yes, ma'am. The next time a woman comes into that co-op with an idea, and it is an idea you have not heard before, you are not going to laugh. You are going to say, tell me more. Do you understand me? His eyes filled. Yes, ma'am. Say it back to me. Tell me more. Good. Now, let's talk about your 40 acres. They talked for 3 hours. Wanda cried twice. Dell cried once. Elspeth did not cry. She poured more coffee. She wrote on a fresh page of the notebook. She copied Wendell's number for him. She told him what to say. Dell left at 5:30. He did not shake her hand. He hugged her. A stiff, awkward 60-year-old man hug. But a hug. Elspeth stood on the porch and watched them drive away. She stood there until she could not see the truck anymore. Then she went back inside. She sat down at the kitchen table. And she put her head down on her arms. And she cried after all. Quiet, small, steady. The way a woman cries when she has been holding something in for a very, very long time. August. Harvest. Torvald ran the combine. Elspeth walked the field one last time before he cut it. She said goodbye to the bloom which was gone anyway. She said goodbye to the summer which was ending. She said goodbye to the girl in the green coat, who had waited so long and had finally been let out. She said goodbye and she said thank you. Then she stood at the edge of the field and watched Torvald cut. The yield came in at 27 bushels an acre, which was For Nebraska buckwheat on marginal ground respectable, which was, for the North Field, extraordinary. The wheat that field had made in its best year had been $15 an acre. The buckwheat at $9.50 a bushel to the Minnesota buyer made $256 an acre, plus Wendell's placement fees, plus her 20% share of the honey. Total, $21,660. From 80 acres. Elspeth sat at her kitchen table, with the numbers in front of her. She looked at them for a long time. She wrote a check to the bank. She paid off the second notice. She wrote a check for the property taxes. She paid them in full. She had money left over. She sat there, 68 years old. Widow, not selling the farm. She said it 3 times, just to hear it. I'm not selling the farm. The knock at the door came on a Tuesday in October. She was not expecting anyone. She wiped her hands on her apron. She went to the door. She opened it. Torben Vale stood on the porch, hat in his hands, just like delicate grown men, hats in hands, on her porch. She had never lived to see this. She had, actually, given up on the idea of ever living to see this. Torben said, "Elspeth, may I come in?" She said, "Yes." She did not smile. She did not glare. She just stepped aside. He would not sit down at first. He stood in her kitchen, turning the hat in his hands. She poured him coffee anyway. She set the cup on the table. She sat. She waited. Torben said, "I heard the numbers." "Yes." 21,000. "Yes." "On 80 acres." "Yes." He looked at the coffee cup. He did not touch it. He said, "I told you not to waste your money." "You did. That is what I said in the spring." "That is what you said." Long silence. He said, "Elspeth." "Yes. I owe you an apology." She waited. He did not give one. Instead he said, "I owe you an apology. But I am not going to give you one right now, because I know you well enough to know that an apology is not what you need from me." She raised her eyebrows. He said, "What you need from me is for me to do better. From today forward, what you need from me is for me to stock buckwheat seed at the co-op starting next spring. What you need from me is for me to set up a relationship with the Minnesota buyer so the other farmers in this county don't have to figure it out alone. What you need from me is for me to make sure that when the next woman walks into my co-op with an idea, she does not have to walk out feeling the way you walked out." She stared at him. She had prepared herself for many things this year. She had not prepared herself for this. She said, "Torben." He said, "Yes." She said, "Sit down." He sat. She said, "Drink your coffee." He picked up the cup. His hand was steady, which surprised her. She had thought it would shake. She said, "Torben, let me tell you about the honey contract." He set the cup down and pulled a small notebook out of his shirt pocket. He clicked his pen. He said, "I am ready." She began to talk. She talked for 2 hours. He wrote down every word. Winter came. Winter came hard. Not the drought. That was over. But cold. Cold like Nebraska knows how to be cold. Snow. Wind. Ice on the pump handle at 5 in the morning. Elspeth did not mind. Elspeth had the parlor wood stove going most days. Elspeth had the notebook. Elspeth had 3 nights a week visitors, because word had traveled, because Del Ostergaard had told his brother in Auburn, because Torben Vale had mentioned it to 2 farmers from Odo County, because Wanda Ostergaard had told the choir alto, who had told the Presbyterian sewing circle, who had told the ladies at the Grange. By the middle of November, Elspeth was hosting what she and Winnie had begun to call in private the buckwheat suppers. Every Saturday evening, 7 o'clock, she would make a pot of chili and a pan of cornbread. Farmers would arrive, men mostly, but also 2 women. 2 farm women who had, in their own kitchens, been quietly reading the same articles and thinking the same thoughts. She let them all in. She fed them. She showed them the notebook. She gave them Wendell's number. She gave them the name of the Minnesota buyer. She told them exactly what she had learned, what she had done right, what she had done wrong. She was patient. She was direct. She did not pretend to be humble when she wasn't. She said more than once in the plainest voice she had, "I was right about this in 1941. I was right about it in April. I have been right about it the whole time." The men nodded, because the numbers said what the numbers said. Winnie came for Christmas. She was 8.5 now. She sat at the kitchen table with a coloring book while 3 farmers from Pawnee County talked about crop rotations with her grandmother. At one point, one of the farmers, a man named Osgood Frell, turned to Winnie and said, "Little girl, your grandma is a smart woman." Winnie did not look up from her coloring book. Winnie said, "I know." Osgood laughed. Elspeth smiled into her coffee. Later that night, after Winnie was asleep on the parlor sofa, Elspeth stood at the window and watched the snow. She thought, Winnie will remember this. Winnie will remember that a whole roomful of grown men came to her grandmother's kitchen to ask her grandmother questions. Winnie will remember the sound of her grandmother's voice, answering. Winnie will remember, and someday Winnie will be 22, and someone will tell her she cannot do a thing. And she will remember, and she will not put her dream in a trunk. Elspeth pressed her forehead against the cold glass. She thought, that is worth everything. Every bit of the 46 years. If it changes just this one small girl. Spring 1988. 7 farmers in Cheyenne County planted buckwheat. Total acreage, 580. All of it on marginal ground. None of it replaced anyone's wheat. Everyone kept planting wheat on their good ground. The buckwheat went on the ground Magnus would have called garbage. The ground their fathers had called worthless. Wendell Brogan expanded his operation. He brought in a partner. He placed 140 hives across the 7 farms. He drove down Elspeth's lane one afternoon in April. He got out of his truck. He walked toward the porch. Elspeth met him at the steps. He said, "Elspeth." "Wendell," he said, "I want to show you something." He walked her to his truck. He opened the passenger door. He handed her a jar of honey, dark, almost black, rich. The label said, in a small, plain type, Halvorson North, buckwheat honey, Cheyenne County, Nebraska. Since 1987, she held the jar in her hands. She did not speak. Wendell said, "The buyer in Omaha designed the label. He asked what to call it. I told him." She looked up. She said, "Wendell." He said, "You don't owe me anything for it. It's yours. It should have your name on it." She said, "It's Magnus' name." He said, "It's yours too." She looked at the jar. She thought about Magnus. She thought about how a name can be a cage and also sometimes a door. She said, "Thank you." Wendell nodded. He said, "Elspeth." "Yes. I have to ask you something." "All right. Would you be willing to come to Beatrice one weekend this summer and speak to a group of beekeepers about what you've done?" Her mouth opened. She said, "Wendell, I'm not a public speaker." He said, "Elspeth, you have been public speaking in your kitchen for 6 months to any farmer who walks in the door. You are the best public speaker I know." She looked at him. She said, "I'll think about it." He said, "That's all I'm asking." He got back in his truck. He drove away. She stood on the porch, jar of honey in her hands. She held it up to the light. The color was the color of a good decision made 20 years too late, but still made. She went inside. She put it on the kitchen windowsill, where the morning sun would hit it, where she would see it every day. She went to Beatrice. 60 people. She was terrified. She spoke for 40 minutes. She got a standing ovation. She drove home in Magnus' old truck in the dark, with the radio off. Her hands on the wheel, steady. The word spread. The word spread the way words spread in the Midwest. Slowly, person to person, kitchen to kitchen. church basement to church basement. By the fall of 1988, she had spoken to 4 different groups. By 1989, 6. By 1990, 12. 2 women from an agricultural magazine drove out from Kansas City in the summer of 1990 to interview her. They stayed all afternoon. The article ran in the fall. The title was, "The Grandmother Who Broke the Wheat Monopoly." Elspeth did not care for the title. She thought it was too much, but she cut it out. She put it in the kitchen drawer, where the letter had been, the unsent letter, which was no longer unsent, which had, in the way of important letters, finally arrived where it was going. Spring, 1991. Elspeth was 72. Winnie was 12. Winnie was tall now, coltish. Her mother had cut her hair to her shoulders, which Elspeth thought was too short, but Winnie loved it, which was what mattered. Winnie was reading a book about horses on the parlor floor when the phone rang. Elspeth answered. "Hello," a voice she had not heard in almost 4 years. "Mrs. Halvorsen, this is Marianne Kestrel." Elspeth sat down. "Dr. Kestrel." "Elspeth, please." "Marianne." "Marianne, I have something to ask you." "All right." The Nebraska Cooperative Extension is holding its annual Small Farm Conference next month. In Lincoln, they have asked me to recommend a keynote speaker on alternative crops. I told them I had only one recommendation. Silence. "Elspeth? I'm here. I know it is short notice. I know Lincoln is a drive. I know you have not spoken to a group of this size." Elspeth's hand had gone to her throat. She said, "Marianne, yes. Are you asking me to come speak at Nebraska?" "I am asking you to come speak at Nebraska." Elspeth closed her eyes. She saw a young woman in a green coat walking across a college campus in 1940. She saw a lecture hall. She saw a professor at the front of the room. She saw a letter, folded, in a trunk, in an attic, in a farmhouse in Cheyenne County. She saw, at last, that letter arriving where it had been trying to go for 50 years. She opened her eyes. She said, "Yes, yes, I will come." Dr. Kestrel said, "Thank you. Thank you, Elspeth." Elspeth said, "Marianne, yes. May I bring my granddaughter?" "Please do." She hung up the phone. She looked at Winnie. Winnie looked up from her book. Winnie said, "Grandma, who was that?" Elspeth said, "That was the professor I wrote to in 1941. Winnie sat up. She said, "The one from the trunk?" "The one from the trunk." "What did she want?" Elspeth swallowed. She said, "She wants me to give a speech at the University of Nebraska next month." Winnie stared at her. Winnie said, "Grandma, yes." Winnie's face did something wonderful. Winnie's whole face lit up. Winnie said, "Grandma, you have to wear something nice." Elspeth laughed. She said, "You are going to help me pick it out." The morning of the conference, Elspeth stood in her bedroom in front of the closet. Winnie sat on the bed. They had already picked out the outfit. Blue dress, wool jacket, pearl earrings that Magnus had given her the year Aldrich was born. But Elspeth was standing in front of the closet. She was reaching to the back. She pulled out a canvas coat. Old, worn, too big. Magnus' coat. Winnie said, "Grandma, that's not going to look nice at a university." Elspeth said, "I know. So why are you getting it?" Elspeth held the coat up. She said, "Because he should be there." Winnie was quiet. Then she said, "You mean Grandpa Magnus?" "Yes. Are you going to wear it?" "I'm going to carry it." "Why?" Elspeth held the coat against her chest. She said, "Because he was wrong, and I was right, and I forgave him, and I loved him, and he loved me, and he was so afraid of losing me that he hid me from myself for 50 years. And I want him to see this. I want him to see this whole day, even if the only way I can bring him is to carry his coat." Winnie stared at her. Winnie said, quietly, "Grandma, yes, when I'm your age, and I do something big, I hope somebody carries my coat." Elspeth's eyes filled. She said, "Sweetheart, when you are my age, you will have done so many big things that people will have to carry coats in shifts." Winnie laughed. They laughed together. And then they got in the car. The lecture hall in Lincoln was full. 200 people, mostly men, farmers, extension agents, a few professors in the back. Elspeth stood at the podium. She was wearing the blue dress, the wool jacket, the pearl earrings. Magnus' canvas coat was folded neatly on the empty chair beside her. Winnie sat in the front row. Dr. Marion Kestrel sat 2 seats down. Elspeth looked out at the room. Her hands on the podium did not shake. She had promised herself again that they would not shake. She began to speak. She did not use notes. She spoke for 40 minutes. She spoke about the North Field, about the soil, about the bees, about the honey, about the drought that had proved what she had known in 1941. She spoke about a certain co-op counter. She did not name the man, but she spoke about the moment. She said the words, "I would hate to see you waste your money." She let the room sit with those words. She said, "I would hate to see any of you say those words, ever, to any woman who walks into your business with an idea and a notebook, because I promise you, one of them is right." She paused. She said, "I was right for 50 years, and nobody knew, because nobody asked, and I don't want any woman in this room, or any woman connected to any man in this room, to wait 50 years. Do you understand me?" The room was silent. She said, "Do you understand me?" A man in the back, an old man with white hair, said out loud, "Yes, ma'am." Then another, "Yes, ma'am." Then more, "Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am." Winnie in the front row put her face in her hands, and Elspeth smiled. After the applause, after the standing ovation, after the line of people who came up to shake her hand, after the young women in the back who came up crying and could not speak. After all of that, Dr. Marion Kestrel walked up to the podium. She was 82 years old now, small, white-haired, sharp-eyed. She held out a hand. Elspeth took it. Dr. Kestrel said, "Elspeth, I have something for you." She reached into her leather satchel. She pulled out an envelope, old, yellowed, sealed. Elspeth looked at it. Dr. Kestrel said, "I wrote this in April of 1941, 2 weeks after I received your letter. When you did not respond to my first reply, I wrote a second one. I kept a carbon copy. Because I thought maybe someday." Her voice cracked. Dr. Kestrel was crying now. Elspeth had never seen Dr. Kestrel cry. Dr. Kestrel said, "I have carried this in my file cabinet for 50 years. Elspeth took the envelope. Her hands at last were shaking. She could not stop them. She opened it. She read it standing there at the podium of a lecture hall at the University of Nebraska. The letter was 3 paragraphs. It offered her a graduate assistantship. It offered her a full tuition waiver. It offered her a research position with Dr. Kestrel's team. It was dated April 17, 1941, 2 days before Elspeth had gotten married. Elspeth stood at the podium. She read the letter twice, then a third time. Winnie was watching from the front row. Dr. Kestrel was watching. The last few people in the hall were watching. Elspeth looked up. She said, in a voice that was almost too quiet to hear, "I would have been a professor." Dr. Kestrel said, "You would have been my colleague." Elspeth held the letter against her chest. She did not cry. She thought. She thought about the young woman in the green coat. She thought about that young woman getting this letter in April of 1941. She thought about the life that would have been, the life that had been, the life she had instead, the son, the husband, the 46 years of pancakes. She thought about Winnie, who would not have existed if Elspeth had said yes to Dr. Kestrel in 1941. Elspeth looked at Winnie in the front row. Winnie who was watching her. Winnie who existed only because Elspeth had said no to a life and yes to another. Elspeth understood at 72 years old in a lecture hall in Lincoln, Nebraska, with a 50-year-old letter in her hand. Understood something she had never understood before. That both lives had been real. That the life she did not live had also been hers. That she was allowed to grieve it. That she was allowed to be proud of the life she did live. That she did not have to choose. She did not have to choose which one was the true one. They were both true. Both hers. Both. She folded the letter. She put it in the pocket of the blue dress. She said to Dr. Kestrel in a voice that shook only a little, "Marianne, thank you." Dr. Kestrel said, "Elspeth, thank you." They held each other for a long time, at the front of a lecture hall, in front of Winnie, in front of the last few witnesses to a 50-year-old wound finally being closed. The drive home was quiet. Winnie fell asleep in the passenger seat. Elspeth drove. She drove past the wheat fields, past the county road, past the co-op, where Torbenvale on Monday would open a new invoice for buckwheat seed. She drove up her own farm lane. She parked the truck. She sat there for a moment. The sun was going down over the north field where she had planted her buckwheat, where she was going to plant it again this year, and every year, until she could not anymore. She got out of the truck. She woke Winnie gently. They walked together across the yard, to the edge of the north field. The buckwheat was up, 5th year now, first bloom already showing, small white beginnings. They stood there at the edge together, the old woman, the young girl. The wind moved through the flowers. Elspeth said, "Winnie." Winnie said, "Yes, Grandma." Elspeth said, "I want you to remember something." "Okay." Elspeth turned to face her. She put her hands on Winnie's shoulders. She said, and her voice was steady and low, and it was the voice of a woman who had come at last into the full possession of herself. She said, "Do not ever let anyone bury your dream. Not your mother, not your husband, not your children, not the town you live in, not the year you were born in, not the age you are, not the age you will be, not even yourself." Winnie's eyes were wide. Elspeth said, "Are you listening to me, Winnie?" Winnie said, "I'm listening." Elspeth said, "You promise me?" Winnie said, "I promise you." Elspeth said, "Say it back." Winnie said, "I will not let anyone bury my dream." "Not ever." Elspeth said, "Not even yourself." Winnie said, "Not even myself." Elspeth pulled her granddaughter close. They held on to each other at the edge of a field of white flowers, in the last light of the day, in Cheyenne County, Nebraska, in the spring of 1991. The buckwheat trembled in the wind. The bees were beginning to come. The old woman closed her eyes. She thought, "I did it. I finally did it. I sent the letter. I planted the field. I stood at the podium. I told the girl. I did it. I did it all." She held her granddaughter tight, and in the distance, faintly, she could almost hear a young woman, in a green coat, in 1940, walking across a campus in Lincoln, smiling, because somehow she had known. She had always known. She had just needed to wait. She had just needed to wait a very long time. Until now. Until, at last. Now.